Welcome to the England pod. We're all England all the time. And that means talking about the match that's just finished in Barcelona. Andorra 0, England 1. 3 wins without conceding to start our World Cup qualifying campaign and life under Thomas Tuchel. I'm Ali Maxwell, George Ellick, bringing the energy with me. What we're realising, the longer that the England pod exists, George, is that not every match reaction pod is Dortmund away. Euro semi-final, Watkins late winner.
Yeah, but you know, for all the glory and the joy of those moments, maybe the reaction to a 1-0 win at effectively a neutral venue against Andorra and the anger that will come out of it is better for a reaction pod, because there's no denying that the scoreline is a bit of an embarrassment. It wasn't particularly exciting to watch. You look at the team before we played and it felt like it was going to be exciting. It seems to be another lesson that, for whatever reason, this collection of England players on a pitch together rarely turns into, you know, the kind of performances maybe we saw from Spain and France 48 hours ago, where they played again to finish 5-4. But you know, there was a moment in the commentary during the first half where Sam Matafei said, you know, this is a team that wants to win the World Cup, and if you can't beat Andorra, you're not going to do that. And I don't think that's necessarily true. Like, I think there were issues tonight, which we'll get on to, but this has basically no bearing on what happens next summer. And so we've got to look for interest and intrigue and things like the team that Tuchel selected, and certain moments within the game. It's job done to an extent, obviously not in terms of the scoreline we expected.
It's a nice line, that. It's a nice pithy line during an uninspiring England performance. As you say, it doesn't really mean anything. We're a long way away from the World Cup. If we had drawn 0-0 rather than 1-0, you know, that wouldn't have had any impact on what happens next summer. In fact, you can lose to Saudi Arabia in the group stages of the World Cup and still win the World Cup, as Argentina showed a couple of years ago. Just before we started recording, you sent me a link to a piece in the Times that says that was England's worst ever win, which as a concept I like a lot, and reminds me a bit of me trying to sell our England Australia 2003 retrospective pod as England's worst ever friendly. So I'm not immune to exaggeration for effect and exaggeration to get people to read something or listen to something. But I've watched England play worse than they played today 20 times, probably in the last decade. And I'll explain what I think was all right, and I'll explain what I think wasn't all right. I just don't see that as being like a disgraceful performance. But maybe I'm just an optimist.
How many times tonight, watching the game, did it feel like we got into a decent position and then you kind of sat up a bit straighter when the shot came in and it just dribbled into the hands or lofted into the hands of the Andorra keeper? Like, in my mind, it was a game where we, as you'd expect, never looked like conceding and created probably enough that on a different day, the ball flies in 3 or 4 times, it's a 3 or 4-0 win and it's job done. And today, just the execution in the final third was really poor. Thomas Tuchel came out afterwards. You're always brave, I think, as a manager when you come out and you mention XG, because realistically, the people who you're trying to persuade about that the performance wasn't as bad as it was are the people who will hate XG. And so you're kind of, I'd say you're doing probably the wrong thing to try and win those people over. But he said we created an XG of 3 and only scored 1 goal, which is unusual underperformance for a game like this. And I think he's kind of right at like 20 shots. I think it was 10 on target. We did enough in the game to win it fairly comfortably. But even in this age of analysis and data and everything else, like, the scoreline ends up being the thing that dominates. And England probably could have played a lot worse than we did tonight and created fewer opportunities, but been more clinical, won the game more comfortably, and people would have been happy. I think the main issue is, and there's no getting away from this, it's still pretty boring. Like, this is meant to be the new era. Like, the biggest issue people had with Gareth Southgate was the quality of the style of football. And we have a new manager in now, and there was an expectation that he's a world-class coach, and that was going to change. And let's be very clear here that Andorra parked the bus for the first 20 minutes or so, but then didn't.
Quite like the cut of their jib, actually, this Andorra side.
Like, England still attempted 750 passes, which is a lot. But they stepped out and they played, certainly, you know, didn't necessarily play a high line, but engaged England further up the pitch than we probably expected them to. And England weren't able to capitalise on that. And my assumption is, and if we go back and listen to the pods that we recorded here when Tuchel was appointed, I think everyone, and that is England fans, some England fans, and probably some people who made the decision to appoint Tuchel, and certainly Tuchel himself, are learning quite quickly that it's not that easy. It's not that easy to get these guys on a pitch and play free-flowing attacking football against a really resolute side who are drilled to play in exactly that way. And it's this. I'm absolutely not making excuses for Tuchel and the team at all, but this is the reality of it. And frankly, I think it's really frustrating from an England perspective, probably from Tuchel's perspective as well, that except for Senegal, who obviously deserve our respect coming into Tuesday's game, and Serbia, who deserve our respect in the qualifying campaign, it's a massive shame that we're not going to play anyone in the top 10 in the world between now and the World Cup, because that's where you learn about us. That's where you learn about how good we are. These are just exercises in, can you break down a resolute side who offer nothing from an attacking perspective? And the answer is normally yes, and it's the measure by which you do so in terms of a scoreline that is judged on how you perform, but the performances are always kind of the same.
Genuinely, my biggest craving from tonight is craving a fixture against, as you've just said, against one of the top teams, just to see what that looks like. That's where Tuchel, in theory, will earn his corn, right? That's where Tuchel's reputation comes from. Knockout football in the club game, domestic competition, but also continental competition, and outsmarting other elite managers. And when you have an elite team against another elite team, making sure that it's your team that come out on top. That's where, in theory, Tuchel's biggest benefit over Southgate is going to come, because frankly, in the qualifiers and in the friendlies, it's unlikely to look very, very different. And I think that's where the fact that it was boring tonight, I don't put that down to Tuchel or his tactics personally. I think Tuchel's tactics, what he wants to happen and what he's trying to set the team up to do, are not boring tactics at all. I think he's trying to do something that's quite attacking, quite gung-ho. I just think the nature of these games make it almost impossible. And if I would criticise Tuchel for anything, it would be more the fact that it seems like he felt he could just come into international management and do something that almost no international managers have ever achieved, which is turn these games into super exciting contests between one team that is completely dominant over the other one, and the other one that just can't possibly go toe-to-toe with them. I think that very fact means that these games can very rarely be exciting. Put it this way, George. If we'd scored 7 of our shots on target instead of 1 of our 10 shots on target, would people have said it was exciting? No, they wouldn't. They'd have said, what a waste of time. It's so uncompetitive. We shouldn't even bother playing against teams like Andorra. So there's basically no real way of winning this. And I don't criticise Tuchel for the tactics, because I don't believe they are negative, boring tactics. I think it's just the nature of international football, the nature of these opponents, the fact that it's June and the end of a long season. He was pretty strong post-match. Lack of urgency. Lack of quality. Those are his words. He's not happy with how the game played out. He's not happy with how the team executed his tactics. But I just think he's been a little overzealous maybe in what he thinks we can do.
It's interesting you mentioned the end of the long season, because that was the first thing Harry Kane said on the pitch after the game, speaking to ITV. He said, it's the end of a long season. We're obviously, he said it wasn't good enough, but he said that was a reason why the performance was so poor. But Spain played France 2 days ago in an incredible contest between two sides that finished 5-4. The World Cup starts in a year and 4 days in America, which will come at the end of a long season, after a summer where a lot of these players have played international football at the end of the season and in the Club World Cup afterwards. If it is the reason why the performance was sluggish, it can't be the excuse, because this is exactly the situation we're going to be in June next year. So I'm not sure I necessarily buy that. And if that is the case, then we have issues, because for some reason the sluggishness seems to impact our players more than others. But yeah, I agree with the Tuchel kind of from a tactical perspective. I would say there are moments of intrigue rather than anything to kind of analyse too thoroughly. Like the fact that we've seen him experiment massively with positions, and I like that personally. Like the way that I look at football, I think that the general perception about the rigidness of positions and the idea that players have a natural position is wrong, and that actually, if you're a footballer with loads of different skill sets, you can impact games in different ways in different parts of the pitch. And spoiler alert for our conversation that comes out with the interview that I did with Lee Carsley yesterday at the under-21 training camp or media day, but that's the way that he sees things, and I think it's the modern way. And Curtis Jones may not have played much football at fullback before, but he possesses the ability in possession to be someone that can hurt teams with his passing ability in a game where he's not really going to be troubled defensively. And it was his really incisive ball was the one moment of quality that led to the goal. Kane initially having a shot parried before it fell to Madueke, who squared it to him to finish off. Like, that was basically the only moment of real quality in the whole game from an incisive passing perspective. Reece James playing on the left is also interesting. I probably hoped that we'd had the end of right footers playing at a left back after Southgate moved on and Kieran Trippier was no longer in the squad. But again, he's a player that, why not? He did okay today. I have a feeling this is going to be a running battle, and I have a feeling that if Tuchel's reign as England manager doesn't prove to be a successful one, it'll be the old square pegs and round old argument that will be thrown at him.
Right, so this is where I'm probably at the risk of contradicting myself. My sort of defence of Tuchel's tactics not being boring, because I think he is setting the team up to try and attack quite a lot and is trying very visibly, and has explained it a number of times, to get us to play with much more intensity, to get our wingers running at fullbacks much more than they ever did before, and to get us counter-pressing much more than we ever did before. And in the first 10-15 minutes, we saw that they couldn't have the ball for more than about 4 seconds before we won it back. That was really good. Obviously, that vanished after 20 minutes, and the performance from 20 minutes onwards was really poor, aside from maybe 10 minutes at the start of the second half. So, there's something in the fact that the team started pretty well in 15 minutes and had a good 15 minutes at the start of the second half. That says to me that the instructions themselves weren't horrendous, and that the team were broadly understood what they were meant to do. It was just that, for whatever reason, fatigue or confusion, it didn't last very long. I mean, what I would say is I agree with what you're saying about players. We shouldn't get too obsessed with players having to play in certain positions. I think what I would say as a slight counter argument is players do have tendencies, right? All footballers, professional or amateur, they have tendencies. They have ways that they like to pass the ball, receive the ball, ways they like to shoot, areas that they like to shoot from or pass from or cross from. And I did feel that some of the team selection and the selection of players in certain roles felt like going against their natural tendencies, or it's not just tendencies, it's just experience and reps, right? It's just what you're used to after 50 games, 60 games, some of them are played this season. Wherever you played the most football, it might take a little bit of getting used to if you start playing in a different position, like getting behind the wheel of another car when you've only driven the same car for years and years. And I think we saw that play out. That was my criticism, if you like, of the team selection, was the fact that I think if you look at the 10 outfield players, there's probably an argument that only 5 of them were playing in what could be called their natural or their normal role, right? And that would be Konza and Byrne, that would be Henderson, that would be Bellingham, and that would be Kane. And Jones looked confused in the first 5 minutes and then grew into it and understood what he was being asked to do. And as you correctly said, Curtis Jones' through ball in the build-up for the first goal is the key moment of quality in the game. It is the key moment of the attack where we score the only goal of the game. So we have to say credit to Curtis Jones. I don't necessarily think that came because it was a masterstroke selecting him to play in that role, but
he wasn't really in the right back position when he did it, was he? So.
Right. Well, he was kind of tucked it. Yeah, he was kind of. But that was it. He wasn't playing right back.
On the right for 3. No,
but he wasn't playing right back in possession. Right.
No.
So yeah, it was. But even in the attacking line behind Kane, I thought it was interesting, notable, and in some ways a bit awkward that we had Madueke and Rodgers playing in the old school way, right? A left footer playing on the left and a right footer playing on the right. It's very, very unusual that, whether it's at club level, whether it's for international football, and even for these individual players, where Rodgers almost always plays in the left half of the pitch, if you like, even if he's playing as a number 10. Madueke almost always plays on the right side of the attack at club level. Those 2 players both had some pretty good moments because they're really good dribblers, and the Andorra fullbacks were very, finding it tough to stop them 1v1. But even drilling down even deeper, I think having Bellingham as the right-sided number 10 and Palmer as the left-sided number 10 was a bit weird, and I thought it looked a bit awkward, particularly Palmer. There is no more exciting sight than Palmer getting on the ball in the right half space and the inside channel, cutting inside with time to pick a pass or a cross or a through ball or cut inside and get a shot off. Palmer mirrored on the left-hand side. I don't see that at all. Like, it's not that he's not a good player. It's not that he can't, curl across to the back post or thread a through ball, but the angles are slightly different, and that's just not what he does particularly well. Even Bellingham, I would say, when he plays in that 10 role, I see him naturally preferring to drift out to the left and combine with left backs and left wingers. So I thought that was just a bit weird, and I think we saw that half of the team just weren't in natural and normal positions for them.
And I definitely agree. And I guess the measure of a manager and a coach is when they get these decisions right. Like, if you're a visionary and you can change a player's position effectively, then that's the impressive part. But it doesn't make much sense just to shuffle everyone around for the sake of it. The one player that I thought it worked quite well, I was almost kind of frustrated when I saw Madueke line up on the left-hand side, because it feels to me when he's at his best, he's so good on the right-hand side at cutting onto his left foot and offers a kind of very good Saka replacement potential. And it was interesting that when Jacob Murphy was asked before the squad was announced, why he thought he should be in the England squad, it was basically because he thought he offered something that no one else in the squad could do, being a natural winger, someone who plays on the right-hand side and is right-footed. And Madueke was actually really effective today, being a left-footed player playing on the left. And he was still able to cut inside, albeit when he cut onto his right foot, it didn't create the goal-scoring opportunities it does when he plays on the right. But he still was able to go outside often and get crosses in the box. And he was quite clearly England's biggest threat on the night.
Man of the match, I reckon.
So maybe it's a case of 6-7 experiments where Tuchel will think, well, that didn't go well, but very good to know that I've got a left footer who can be effective playing down the left-hand side, albeit against Andorra. So, point definitely taken. And there is, this is his third game. And yes, it was a qualifier, but it was a qualifier where, we were 100 on or whatever to win it. I'm sure there is massive experimentation going on in every single game. Every single game has to be a learning curve for Tuchel. And probably in disappointing performances where he said himself that the quality wasn't there, you have to hope that he's learning probably more than a regulation 4-0 win where everyone kind of does okay.
You just said the words "you have to hope," and you also said the words "learning curve." I couldn't agree more. And that's because the narrative has been, we haven't got many camps together, we haven't got many training sessions together, we haven't got many games together. That's all true. But there's a way of looking at this international break where I just don't really feel like it's going to add much. Unless you hope that even in a poor performance and even in players looking a bit awkward in positions or combining with certain teammates, you either win or you learn is the phrase, right? Maybe today is more about learning. I have to hope so because, Tuchel said, I don't know why I'm really enjoying Tuchel in press conferences. I really enjoy the glint in his eye. I really enjoy that he likes going toe-to-toe with journos when he thinks they're asking a bit of a spicy question. But there was a pre-match interview with, I think, Gabriel Clark, who said, how many of your squad for next summer do you think you know already? And he didn't need to give a number. He did not need to give a number, and I think creates a rod for his own back doing so. But he said something like 16, maybe more, maybe less. But you ignore the maybe more, maybe less.
16.
In today's world, you've said 16, so that's your answer. And that's quite mental to me that he would say that. When he's only selected 2 squads, and 4 or 5 players have not been available for them, key players as well. So is he absolutely certain that they're in, even though he's never worked with them before? I just think I don't think it's very helpful. I do quite enjoy it because I find it quite entertaining. But to come back to my original point, this starting 11 tonight probably has, if you're to narrow it down, Thomas, do you know your starting 11 if the World Cup started tomorrow? Tonight's starting 11 probably, I reckon, has 3 players and no more that you'd say are absolutely nailed on to start if it kicked off tomorrow and everyone was fit, right? And I think that's Pickford, and I think that's Bellingham, and I think that's Kane. Of the players that started tonight, I think those are the only ones that would be part of England's strongest 11 right now. And that leads me back to, don't overreact, don't worry too much. we are experimenting, and it's not that exciting.
I think Tuesday is very interesting because even though Tuesday's the friendly and today was the competitive game, Tuesday's a bigger test. And off the back of today, I think there will be a lot of scrutiny on the performance. And Senegal played Ireland on Friday evening. And their team selection was interesting because Ismaila Sarr came off the bench and scored the equaliser. But Koulibaly didn't come off the bench. Idrissa Gueye didn't come off the bench. Nicholas Jackson didn't come off the bench. Idrissa Gueye didn't come off the bench. We have to assume they're all going to start. Iliman Ndiaye was probably the only kind of big name player, I guess, who did start from an attacking perspective. So if you put that all together, if you put Jackson up front and you put Ndiaye off the left and Sarr off the right and Idrissa Gueye midfield, they're going to cause us problems. You know, I know we beat them comfortably in Qatar, but this is a sterner test in terms of like individual opposition ability against us, and we'll have to stand up to it because that's when, you know, if that goes badly against a team who will look to take the game to us to an extent or will offer some threat in transition, then I don't know if there's going to be room for Tuchel to experiment as much as he did this afternoon or this evening. I kind of think if we'd won this comfortably today, you look at it as being more of a free pass. But, you know, we've already seen a couple of headlines coming out from the papers which will stoke the fires tomorrow. And after a lot of positivity around the appointment and a new era, at the moment it feels like we're kind of shuffling backwards rather than striding forwards.
Yeah, I really feel strongly that part of the reason why the England pod exists is to not just do what generally happens after England games, where you can pretty much, just as a fan or a casual observer, you could probably write the articles yourself, and you could certainly write the headlines. But then I'm not that interested in just playing the role of happy clapper for the sake of it either. No. So hopefully listening to us talk this through has some value in understanding that it's not always black and white. In fact, at international level and outside of major tournaments, it really isn't black and white.
You say you want to provide the nuance into England coverage?
Yes. That's not a very sexy strapline, though, is it? That's not going to sell. I'm glad you mentioned Madueke. I think he was clearly England's man of the match. Most dribbles completed, most chances created, 2 shots on target as well. Exactly what Tuchel wants from his wide players. He's been incredibly explicit about that. And in the last camp, we had Rashford and Foden. We had Rashford and Bowen starting games out wide, and none of them quite nailed it. And tonight we had Madueke and we had Rodgers, and Madueke clearly performed the best of the two. So far, under Tuchel, for whom the wide forwards are very clearly an important part of the team, Madueke has stood out, albeit obviously against the lowest opposition that we've played for so far. And I'm just pleased because there's never been any doubt that Madueke, 1v1 against a fullback, is one of the most difficult to stop dribblers that I can remember, in terms of English internationals. Real speed and power, a kind of awkward jinky style. He can come inside, he can go down the line. It's his final ball. It's not just his final ball, frankly. It's his decision making and the technical side of his final action that is stopping him currently from being as good as a lot of the big names that get talked about a lot, many of whom are wide forwards in the world game at the moment. And I hope that those are things that can develop. I think because it's not just a technical thing and it's not just a decision-making thing, as I see it anyway, there is still quite a long way to go. But as you said, he showed tonight that he's not out of place in an England squad and he can really impact games in an England shirt, and that's really, really exciting.
The kind of Tuchel main press conference is kind of coming out in drips and drabs as we go through it, and there's a quote saying that he's kind of gone after the players a little bit, said we lacked seriousness and urgency. I didn't like the attitude. And it's interesting. I mean, it's an interesting way to, having gone some way to defending the performance and talking about the expected goals and everything else, to go after the attitude. It does feel like the culture around England under Southgate, which I think benefited us for the most part, was effectively to blank out the noise and to get on with the job at hand and to carry out the instructions of the coaching staff, and the result was, if the result was good, that was fine, and not to be affected by the outside noise. And here it kind of feels like Tuchel's joining in to an extent, which is a shift, and I think the players will have to get used to. There's absolutely no way Gareth Southgate would sit there after a game and say, I didn't like the attitude, I didn't like the seriousness or the urgency. So, he's laying down there. He's basically coming out in a way that might work, and saying, look, I don't necessarily have your backs. If I don't feel like you are, if I feel like there's an air of complacency, I'm not only going to call you out in the change room, but I'll call you out in front of the press as well.
It has, from the moment he was appointed, felt like a bit of a tightrope act, and it's exciting and it's a bit scary as well. A couple of gripes for me, and I feel bad about this because I am a huge fan of Dan Burn as a human being, but he's not convincing me in an England shirt in his 2 starts so far, and I'm willing to say that some of this might just be down to the fact that he looks aesthetically quite ungainly, but in the way that we have defended in both games that he's played, which has been always on the counter-attack, he's given me the willies a little bit, I have to say. And I think there have been a few attacks where he hasn't looked that great in that role. And look, it's difficult to defend a lot of space. He's basically the only man back at times. But it's not just that, it's also in his passing, where I think he's, to me, very clearly at least one, if not 2 or 3 levels below the man next to him, Ezri Konsa. I think he's also well below the level of Levi Colwill in terms of progressive passing. And that's really important in these games. Like, it's really important when you have a centre-back who's going to have 100 touches in a game that they are of a certain level technically. And he's not convincing me on that front. So I'd be interested to hear in the comments on YouTube or on Spotify if anyone strongly disagrees, if anyone agrees. I feel like it's almost slightly illegal to get close to criticising Dan Burn, because clearly it's fantastic and it's a fantastic story that he's in the squad in the first place. But I'm not, purely from a football fan point of view, feeling that convinced about him in an England shirt. I think on the flip side, Konsa is looking excellent. He's playing a lot of really good balls over the top and threaded passes that really open up what England can do in attack, and in particular, balls in between fullback and centre-back for the wingers to run onto. They don't always come off, of course they don't. Not even the best passes in the world. Pirlo wouldn't have 100% success rate on high tariff passes like that, but Konsa, to me, is doing a really good job. Another gripe of mine is we had loads of corners again tonight, and we're not getting close to scoring from a corner, and that is annoying, because if we're going to win a tournament, there's going to be a chance that we're going to play 1, 2, 3 pretty tight games with not much in it, and being dangerous from set pieces is obviously a way of nudging those in your favour. So I want to see us look more dangerous from those situations. Anthony Barry, Tuchel's assistant, has written a million words on set pieces, so hopefully he can start pulling off some better routines. Saka was out again for this one. Now, this might just be unfortunate, and this might just be, I'm certainly not suggesting it's anything sinister. It is just an unfortunate reality that Saka has missed 6 straight games for England now, and taking out the Euros last summer, he's missed 11 of the last 17 games. And it's hard for Saka to become England's star player, or one of our star players, if he's not playing for England very often. And it's also the fact that we don't have very many games before the World Cup, as we all know, and I want to see the players that are going to start in the group stages play as much football together as possible, starting in September, October, November camps, and hopefully Saka will be fit for that. But at the moment, it's a bit frustrating that actually he's just pretty absent from an England point of view. Also, Reece James wearing the number 3 didn't feel right. Didn't look right, didn't feel right. I don't like it. I think if we could have a go through some of those numbers and maybe change them for the next camp, that would make me feel a little more comfortable. One thing I aggressively like, though, George, is Harry Kane playing 90 minutes in this game. Tony's on the bench. Kane is tired. He's got bad ankles. He looks pretty stiff. He even looked quite stiff finishing his chance, to be honest. He had a couple of others where on a sharper day, Kane might have gobbled up 2 or 3 here. I just love that he played 90 minutes. And like, this is semi-ironic, but unironically, the example that he sets is absolutely wonderful. He might not be Churchillian in his speeches, and he might not come across as the most inspiring guy, as an orator, but in turning up every single game, in playing every single minute that he's asked to play, in never throwing his hands in the air or moaning or being negative or, winding up the referee or anything like that. I really do genuinely believe he sets an incredible example. There was a montage pre-game where they used a quote from him where he said, after getting 100 caps, country comes before club, country comes before everything, playing for England comes before everything. And that might be the case for all the players. I don't know that, but I love that Kane is so explicit about that. And, I do really, really respect what he brings on that front to the team. So go on, Harry. Another goal for him. Senegal on Tuesday. Would you be going, 11 changes, different tactical system?
No, I would maybe go about picking a side that there's less risk of things going wrong and players looking awkward. So we'll see. I hope Morgan Gibbs-White will start. The fact that we saw that he was number 7 in the squad in this camp.
Yeah, punchy.
You'd hope he's wearing number 7 and starting a game at the City Ground on Tuesday night. Apart from that, you probably hope to see Colwell come in for Burn, as you mentioned. Probably have a couple of, Lewis Kelly on the left and Reece James and Alexander on the right. Get Declan in. It's interesting, no Arsenal players played today. Saka, Rice and Lewis Kelly all rested. I'm not entirely sure why, given they got further in the Champions League than anyone else, but that ended quite a long time ago for them. So I'm not entirely sure why that's the case. Again, we're playing against a side that will fancy their chances against us, that will have a lot of attacking talent on the pitch. Let's use that to our advantage and beat them well.
Yeah, I'd like to see Madueke rewarded with another start, potentially off the right, because I think if there's someone different that comes in and plays wide, it's likely to be either Gordon or Eza, and they're obviously most comfortable on the left-hand side. So I think we will see a different tactical approach. It's been different in all 3 games so far, right? In the first game, off the top of my head, Lewis Kelly played as more of a regulation left-back and galloped in behind to score. In the second game, Lewis Kelly played as a central midfielder in possession, about as inverted as a fullback could possibly be. Today, it was Jones who did that, but from the right-hand side, and he kind of mixed up, as I discussed, the formatting of the players behind the striker as well. So I'm looking forward to seeing what Tommy Tactics comes up with next. I'm enjoying the ride. It's not perfect by any means, but hopefully having kind of chewed on it and gone through it, represented what we really didn't like, and maybe rebutting some of what we think are just myths or mistruths or just missing the point. Hopefully it's been an interesting episode. There's a special episode coming out on Monday. It's with Daniel Story, who is one of the greatest men on the planet, but also one of the best football writers in the world, and a Nottingham Forest fan. Tuesday night we play Senegal at the City Ground. It's the first time England have played in Nottingham for not much less than 100 years. Dan's Story talks George through what that means for Nottingham Forest fans in particular, and we go through a bit of a potted history of Nottingham Forest and the England national team. So tune in for that and our recap of the Senegal game, which will come out late on Tuesday night. Thank you very much for listening, and go well.